Looking back now, the story about the poisoning of Flint, Michigan, it was it tells so much about our country and how the outrage meter is completely broken. And it also tells how that story tells us a lot about how backwards the priority of our government is and how indifferent the government is to the citizens that the public that they're there to serve. When you see that an entire city in this country has been poisoned through no fault of their own. In fact, it was the fault of their government that they were poisoned. We all know they're being poisoned. It's an ongoing emergency. It's an ongoing crisis. We all know. And there is no urgency from the people in power to do anything about it. And there's no urgency from the media to hold the people responsible to account. So when you see our failed response to the public health emergency in Flint, Michigan, it makes all the sense in the world why in this same country the response to COVID has been an epic failure. So a little context for those of you who might have not have followed the story too closely. Back in 2014, Rick Snyder, Democratic governor of the state of Michigan, he had already appointed an emergency manager for the city of Flint, Michigan. And there's so many different outrageous parts of the story, but this, at the very beginning, this is already one of them. So basically, the way emergency managers work is the governor appoints an emergency manager over a city, and that emergency manager immediately becomes the most powerful person in local government. They override everyone, the mayor, the city council. So these emergency managers, along with the governor who appoints them, basically have unilateral authority, and they use this very authoritarian position. They use that to override the objections of the Flint residents and the local government in Flint, so that Rick Snyder can change the water supply of Flint, Michigan back in 2014. And then when they did this, they didn't treat the water properly, and the water corroded all the pipes for the entire city, and that's what started the lead crisis. And ever since then, the people who live in Flint, Michigan, their life has been forever altered. You have people who develop chronic diseases from the effects of the lead poisoning. You have children who are part of the people who develop those chronic diseases. Also, children, a huge increase in the amount of children with developmental delays and learning disabilities that will affect them for the rest of their life. And of course, there were many people who just died from this, the lead poisoning. And we've known about this problem since 2015, and it's not a mystery what it's going to take to actually fix this problem, actually address this problem. You need to replace the pipes in Flint, and you need to provide health care to all the people who have been permanently affected by this. It's fairly straightforward. Replacing the pipes, I heard the estimates say it cost about $1 billion to replace all the pipes in Flint, Michigan. This isn't something that's impossible to do. 6 years, almost 6 years since we've learned about the crisis, and almost 7 years since it originally began with the switching of Flint's water supply. And now, this week, Rick Snyder and his associates, including the emergency manager, have been charged with criminal neglect. And honestly, this is insulting. The charge does not fit the crime, because you look at the possible penalty, the punishment, that the maximum punishment for what they're being charged for, it's maximum a year in jail and $1,000 fine. So it's safe to say Rick Snyder will not go to jail, and he'll very likely get $1,000 fine for poisoning an entire city. I'm not celebrating this. I think this is insulting. It's insulting to the residents of Flint, Michigan. It's insulting to everybody in this country, because Rick Snyder almost single-handedly and unilaterally decided to poison an entire city in this country. And he did it to save some money. And you mean to tell me that the consequence for that, for forever altering the lives of so many people, the people who lost loved ones, the people who have now permanent chronic diseases, the children who now have learning disabilities that will affect them for the rest of their lives, the price for that is $1,000 fine. So when people talk about separate justice systems and how it isn't fair, this is exactly what we're talking about. Shit like this is what we're talking about, where the elites, they are above the law. If you're a politician, if you're a corporate executive, if you're a very wealthy person in this country, the laws, the rules, they do not apply to you. I'm consistent. I say that in this country, we're too quick to throw people in prison. We're too quick to throw people's lives away and incarcerate them in our horrific prison system. We're too quick to do that for crimes that do not merit that type of punishment. I'll say that. I'll definitely say that. I definitely think we should do a lot to lower the prison population in this country. At the same time, if we as a society agree that there are crimes so egregious that people should be put in prison for years as punishment, then I don't see how poisoning an entire city and then covering it up so that more people can continue to be poisoned, I don't see how that doesn't fit the description of a crime that you should just automatically be put in prison for years. Instead, all you get is it's not even a slap on the wrist, it's a tap on the wrist, and you have to pay $1,000 fine, and you move on with your life. You go on about your life, and it doesn't really even make that much of a difference to you. Because Rick Snyder, he's still welcomed in polite society. He's still welcomed among the elites. He endorsed Joe Biden just a couple months ago. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and their campaign put out a fucking press release bragging about how they got Rick Snyder's endorsement and how great he is and all that stuff. After we all know the man poisoned an entire city in this country. The incoming Democratic administration is praising this man. So Rick Snyder, even though this should haunt him for the rest of his life, and honestly, there's an argument to be made he should be in prison for the rest of his life for what he did in Flint, Michigan. But there is no justice in this country. Rick Snyder will continue to carry on in polite society. Rick Snyder was offered a job by Harvard University to come teach at the university about how to run state and local governments. The man that presided over one of the worst public health emergencies in this country or one of the most infamous public health emergencies in this country, gets a job at one of the top universities in this country to talk about the shit that he failed at miserably. So there is never any accountability. There is never a price to pay. You can do anything. As if you're an elite, you can do anything up to and including poisoning an entire city full of people and then covering it up. So the Flint, Michigan story was a precursor of how bad things can get in this country. Because it's not just Flint, Michigan. This was the most infamous case of a city being poisoned. But we've learned since then, Reuters put out a report about maybe 4 years ago, that there are over 3,000 different areas, municipalities, that have double the lead levels as Flint, Michigan in this country. 3,000 different cities in this country. So there are arguably millions of people in this country being poisoned. And the government is aware of this issue, but they aren't doing anything to fix it. Barack Obama was aware of the poisoning in Flint, Michigan. And what did he do? He went down to Flint and did a fucking photo op. He could have declared it a national emergency zone or whatever it is. And that would have given all the residents of Flint, Michigan access to Medicare, and the government would take care of the cost of their medical expenses. Obama could have done that. Obama could have allocated the $1 billion in emergency funding to replace all the pipes in Flint, Michigan, not just the main water supply, but also all the other corroded pipes in all the other buildings. It would have cost $1 billion. They didn't do that. And in part, I think it was because then they'd have to address the issue in the 3,000 other municipalities in this country, in all the other different cities where people are being poisoned. And that would actually require them to prioritize the health and the well-being of the public and craft policy that is in the interest of the public. And we all know that's not what politicians are there to do. They're there to enrich themselves, advance their careers, and serve the corporate donors. So when you get stories like Flint, Michigan, it shouldn't come as a surprise that when the pandemic hit, we have this shit response from the government to not only completely ignore the problem and the public health emergency, but they'll offer you scraps while the crisis continues to exacerbate exponentially. They'll offer you scraps and tell you to be grateful for it. They gave the residents of Flint some bottled water for a couple years. They gave them some water filters that don't really address the main problem. And they said, be grateful for it. Take it or leave it. We could do nothing. It's better than nothing. Have you heard that before? No, that's how they did the people in Flint, Michigan. That's how they do in the rest of the country. And stories like this should just be, they don't get the necessary outrage. So Rick Snyder, all his fucking goons in Flint, Michigan, they should all be charged with way more serious crimes. They should all be facing life in prison for what they did in that city.